You think breakfast for one means cold cereal and instant coffee? Think again. African American seniors once started their mornings with simple, affordable meals that brought warmth and nourishment to solo tables. Let's dig into 30 cheap African American breakfasts for seniors living alone. Okra and tomato breakfast stew offered a savory morning alternative that celebrated the summer garden's best. Fresh okra pods were sliced and simmered with ripe tomatoes, onions, and a hint of garlic until the vegetables softened into a flavorful broth. The natural thickening quality of okra gave the stew a gentle body, making it perfect for ladling over warm cornbread. Some families added smoked sausage or a pinch of cayenne for a heartier dish, while others kept it purely vegetarian, letting the vegetables shine. Served steaming hot, it filled the kitchen with a scent both earthy and bright, reminding everyone of harvest days and backyard gardens. Okra and tomato breakfast stew reflected African American traditions of making the most of seasonal produce, proving that breakfast could be savory, sustaining, and deeply tied to the land. It invited families to gather early and savor the simple pleasure of fresh vegetables cooked with care and served with love. Collard green omelette was a breakfast born from thrift and the habit of making yesterday's leftovers stretch. Collard greens, usually cooked long and slow with seasoning, were often tucked into eggs the next morning, creating a dish that was both frugal and flavorful. Families valued it because it made use of what they already had, ensuring nothing went to waste. The combination of tender greens with fluffy eggs gave a balance of nutrition and satisfaction. For children, it was a familiar flavor carried into a new form, while adults enjoyed the heartiness without requiring more expensive meat. It was a dish that tied breakfast to dinner, blending the rhythms of the household kitchen into one continuous cycle of reuse. Betty Crocker kitchens may have praised convenience, but African American homes thrived on this kind of ingenuity. Collard green omelets are rare today, but they once carried the quiet wisdom of making much from little and starting mornings strong. Cathead biscuits with cane syrup earned their playful name from their impressive size, each biscuit as big as a cat's head. The dough was mixed by hand, using flour, lard, and buttermilk to create a texture both fluffy and sturdy enough to split and fill. Baked until golden brown, they emerged from the oven towering and fragrant. Grandparents remember serving them with thick drizzles of dark cane syrup or honey, a combination that balanced sweet and savory with every bite. These giant biscuits were a centerpiece of country breakfasts, capable of holding slices of fried ham or scrambled eggs without falling apart. Families loved how a single biscuit could satisfy even the hungriest farmhand, making them practical as well as indulgent. Their name sparked laughter and curiosity, ensuring they were always a conversation starter at the table. Today, the memory of Cathead biscuits remains a warm reminder of big flavors, generous hearts, and mornings filled with the smell of baking bread. Molasses oatmeal filled kitchens with the deep aroma of blackstrap sweetness, offering an iron-rich start that was both frugal and indulgent. Old-fashioned oats simmered slowly in milk or water until creamy, then received a generous spoonful of thick sorghum or blackstrap molasses. The dark syrup melted into the oats, tinting them a warm brown and adding a flavor both smoky and sweet. Many families used molasses not only for its taste, but also for its mineral strength, a natural source of iron and energy. Some sprinkled chopped nuts or sliced bananas on top for extra texture, while others added a pinch of cinnamon for gentle spice. Molasses oatmeal spoke to a time when nourishment and economy were equally important, turning a humble grain into a breakfast that felt rich and sustaining. It remained a quiet favorite of African American households, a reminder that even the simplest bowls could carry history, health, and the comforting weight of tradition with every spoonful. Molasses milk was one of those simple breakfast drinks that could fill an empty stomach and give strength to start the day without costing much. A mug of warm milk would be stirred with a generous spoon of blackstrap molasses until it turned dark, thick, and sweet, creating a drink unlike anything else. For families without access to expensive sugar, molasses was a cheaper and more nutritious option, packed with iron, calcium, and minerals that were badly needed in homes stretched thin. Children often drank it before school, while adults relied on it as a quick energy boost before heading to work in fields, factories, or other labor. It was easy to prepare, affordable, and comforting on cold mornings when heavier meals were not always possible or practical. The taste was bold, with a deep sweetness that lingered, giving a sense of fullness and warmth that plain milk never offered. It was more than a drink. It was a way of stretching resources while caring for a family's needs with love and creativity. Today, it has disappeared from most tables, but it once stood proudly as a daily ritual of comfort. Sweet potato biscuits added a gentle sweetness to the morning, making them a treasured treat for families across the South. Mashed sweet potatoes were folded into soft dough along with a spoonful of cane syrup and a touch of warm spices. As the biscuits baked, the natural sugars caramelized, creating a golden crust and a tender, moist interior. Served warm with butter or a smear of homemade jam, they filled kitchens with a scent that promised a comforting start to the day. Grandparents often saved leftover sweet potatoes from supper just to make these biscuits at dawn, stretching every ingredient while creating something that felt indulgent. Their vibrant color and subtle sweetness brightened even the simplest breakfast plates, pairing well with scrambled eggs or strong black coffee. These biscuits were a perfect example of resourceful cooking that turned farm harvests into something both nourishing and memorable, leaving a flavor that still lingers in family stories and worn recipe cards. Catfish and grits gave weekend mornings a soulful edge, pairing crisp fried fish with creamy stone-ground grits in a combination that felt both rustic and celebratory. Fresh river catfish fillets were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a dusting of cornmeal before sliding into hot oil where they sizzled to a golden brown. The grits simmered slowly on the stove, enriched with butter and a touch of cream for a silky texture that balanced the crunch of the fish. Families often gathered around big skillets of catfish on Sundays after church, turning breakfast into a communal event. Some added a squeeze of lemon or a dash of hot sauce to brighten the flavors, while others served sliced tomatoes or greens on the side. Catfish and grits carried the heritage of southern waterways and the ingenuity of African-American cooks who transformed local catches into a beloved morning feast that satisfied hunger and celebrated the bounty of rivers and farms alike. Hogs hash was a breakfast that spoke to the no-waste mentality of African-American cooking traditions that valued resourcefulness and respect for food. When a hog was butchered, nothing was left unused, and the head provided meat that could be stewed, chopped, seasoned, and fried into hearty dishes. Families would mix the shredded meat with potatoes, onions, and sometimes peppers, then cook it together in a skillet until browned, crispy, and richly flavored. The flavor was intense, smoky, and savory, and it filled the house with a smell that lingered long after breakfast was finished. It was not just food, but a reminder of how creativity and resourcefulness made survival possible in communities where every scrap mattered. Children grew up eating it without complaint because it was hearty, flavorful, and kept them full through school, farm work, or chores. Adults relied on it as a way to honor the animal by using every part of it, ensuring nothing went to waste. Though Hogs hash has nearly vanished from today's kitchens, it once stood as a powerful symbol of resilience, thrift, and respect for tradition that sustained families. Molasses pull bread brought a gentle sweetness to early mornings and delighted children who loved to tear off soft, sticky pieces while the loaf was still warm. The yeast dough was enriched with sorghum or blackstrap molasses, giving it a rich color and a deep, caramel-like flavor. After a slow rise, it was baked until the crust turned dark and slightly chewy, while the inside stayed moist and tender. Families treasured this bread because it required little more than patience and a steady hand, yet the reward was a fragrant loaf that could feed many. Grandparents remember how the scent of molasses would drift through the house, promising a breakfast that felt like a celebration even on an ordinary day. Slices were enjoyed plain, toasted or slathered with butter, making every bite a reminder of how sweet life could be when shared at the family table. Molasses pull bread remains a symbol of care and time, proof that the simplest ingredients can create the most lasting memories. Hoppin John morning bowl carried the luck and legacy of the South into every spoonful, blending black-eyed peas, fluffy rice, and smoky bacon for a meal steeped in tradition. Peas were simmered until tender with onions, garlic, and a hint of pork, then spooned over freshly cooked rice so the savory juices soaked into every grain. A sprinkle of green onions or a splash of pepper vinegar added brightness, while some cooks stirred in diced peppers for extra color and flavor. This dish had long been served on New Year's Day for prosperity, but in the 1970s, many African American families enjoyed it year-round as a hearty breakfast. It offered protein, fiber, and deep flavor that sustained workers and schoolchildren alike. Hoppin John morning bowl reminded each generation of the history carried in its ingredients, from West African roots to Southern kitchens, proving that food could nourish both body and spirit while keeping cultural memory alive with every bite of smoky, satisfying goodness. Field pea cakes were one of those breakfast recipes that reflected both creativity and frugality. Leftover field peas would be mashed and mixed with cornmeal, onion, and a touch of seasoning, then shaped into patties and fried until crisp. They were simple to prepare and stretched whatever little was left from dinner into the morning meal. For farming families, peas were easy to grow and store, making them a dependable staple. The patties were hearty enough to satisfy hunger and could be eaten plain or alongside bread, syrup, or even a bit of bacon when available. The texture was soft inside with a crunchy crust that made them appealing to both children and adults. Field pea cakes spoke to the ingenuity of cooks who made sure nothing went to waste. They were not just thrifty, but also delicious, proving that even the simplest ingredients could be turned into a breakfast worth remembering. Field pea breakfast stew transformed humble peas into a nourishing start to the day. Fresh or dried field peas were simmered slowly with onions, garlic, and a smoked ham hock until the broth turned rich and flavorful. Served over hot rice, the stew delivered protein and warmth that fueled hours of labor. Families valued it as a way to stretch ingredients while creating a meal that felt hearty and complete. Grandparents remember waking to the scent of peas simmering on the stove, a steady reminder that breakfast was already underway before dawn. The dish brought together garden harvests and cured meat, reflecting a tradition of combining what was fresh with what had been carefully preserved. It was a breakfast that filled bellies and lifted spirits, offering comfort in every spoonful. Today, field pea breakfast stew stands as a delicious tribute to the patience and skill of those who cooked with care and shared their tables with love. Pork neckbone and rice turned a humble cut into a deeply flavored breakfast that spoke to generations of resourceful cooking. Meaty pork neckbones were simmered slowly with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until their rich broth infused every grain of rice. The long cooking released tenderness and flavor, transforming inexpensive ingredients into a dish that tasted luxurious. Families often added a pinch of red pepper or a splash of vinegar for brightness, while some stirred in greens for added nourishment. Served steaming hot, pork neckbone and rice offered hearty protein and comforting warmth that fueled long workdays. This meal reflected the African American tradition of using every part of the animal with skill and respect, proving that nothing needed to be wasted to create something memorable. Pork neckbone and rice stood as both sustenance and celebration, a bowl of savory history that reminded everyone at the table of the creativity and strength passed down through kitchens across the South and beyond. Liver pudding with cornbread was a breakfast that made use of both thrift and tradition. Liver pudding, made from ground pork liver mixed with spices and grain, was sliced and fried until warm and fragrant. Served alongside crumbled cornbread, it created a dish that was hearty, filling, and economical. Though the flavor was bold, it was respected as a nutritious way to stretch meat and ensure nothing went to waste. African American kitchens relied on dishes like this to feed large families affordably, making liver pudding a familiar sight at the morning table. The pairing with cornbread added comfort and balance, giving a soft texture to go with the savory richness of the pudding. For many, this dish was a reminder of resilience and resourcefulness. Though it is rarely prepared today, liver pudding with cornbread once carried both pride and practicality in every bite. Fried ripe plantains brought a touch of Caribbean sweetness to Southern breakfasts, a flavor carried by migration and memory. Fully ripe plantains were sliced on the diagonal, their skins almost black to signal perfect sugar content. They were pan-fried in butter until their edges caramelized and their centers turned soft and custard-like. A sprinkle of brown sugar or a drizzle of cane syrup heightened the natural sweetness, making them irresistible alongside eggs or grits. Families cherished this dish for its tropical flair and the way it honored connections between African American and Caribbean kitchens. Grandparents recall how the scent of frying plantains would fill the house, a fragrance both exotic and familiar, tying generations to distant shores. Whether served alone as a treat or paired with savory dishes for contrast, fried ripe plantains turned an ordinary morning into something special. Their golden color and rich aroma still evoke memories of shared breakfasts and the enduring blend of cultures that shaped African American foodways. Buttermilk biscuits with cane syrup brought the warm fragrance of the Southern kitchen to every African American breakfast table in the 1970s, where weekend mornings began with the sound of dough being patted and folded by hand. The biscuits rose tall and flaky as they baked in heavy pans, their buttery layers puffing into golden clouds. Cane syrup, boiled from freshly pressed sugarcane juice, added a deep, smoky sweetness that no ordinary syrup could match. Families kept jars of the thick amber syrup in the pantry, ready to drizzle over steaming biscuits straight from the oven. Some cooks stirred a little butter into the syrup for a glossy glaze, while others left it pure and strong to balance the biscuit's delicate crumb. This simple pairing carried memories of family farms, Sunday gatherings, and the strength of generations who turned humble ingredients into unforgettable flavor. Buttermilk biscuits with cane syrup proved that the simplest foods, treated with care, could turn an ordinary morning into a celebration of heritage and home. Cornmeal mush with sorghum syrup was a staple breakfast that reflected the creativity and resilience of African American kitchens in the South and beyond. The mush itself was simple, made from cornmeal cooked slowly with water or milk until it thickened into a smooth porridge that filled bowls generously. On its own, it was filling but plain, so families would drizzle sorghum syrup over the top to add sweetness and richness without needing expensive sugar. Sorghum was cheaper, widely available in the South, and deeply tied to farm life, making it a household staple for generations of working families. This dish was eaten hot at the table with spoons, sometimes with butter or milk added, or cooled in pans and sliced to be fried later as griddle cakes. For children, it was a comfort food that brought both energy and warmth on school mornings when bellies needed to be full. For adults, it was a dependable way to stretch limited supplies into a hearty start to the day, ensuring no one went hungry. Cornmeal mush with sorghum syrup was never fancy, but it was practical, satisfying, and deeply tied to the rhythm of working life. Grits with crackling bits brought a satisfying crunch to the creamy comfort of stone-ground corn. Grits were simmered slowly with water and a pinch of salt until they reached a silky texture, then enriched with crispy pieces of pork cracklings that added both flavor and texture. The rich aroma of rendering pork fat filled the kitchen, signaling a breakfast that promised warmth and sustenance. Families loved this dish because it turned inexpensive corn and leftover pork into something memorable and deeply satisfying. Grandparents recall how the cracklings popped in the pan, a sound that always brought children running to the stove. Served in deep bowls with a pat of butter, these grits provided lasting energy for long mornings of work in the fields or at the mill. Each spoonful carried a mix of creamy corn and smoky crunch, a combination that reflected the resourcefulness and creativity of cooks who knew how to make every ingredient shine. Fried apples with brown sugar filled kitchens with the scent of caramel and spice as butter sizzled in heavy skillets across African American homes of the 1970s. Thick apple slices were laid into the pan where they softened and browned, soaking up melted butter and a slow sprinkle of dark brown sugar. The sugar melted into a glossy syrup that coated every piece, creating a warm and fragrant side that paired perfectly with hot bread or flaky biscuits. Some cooks added a pinch of cinnamon or nutmeg, while others squeezed in a little lemon juice to brighten the sweetness. Families loved these fried apples as a weekend treat, serving them alongside sausage, grits, or even spooned over pancakes for an indulgent start to the morning. The dish honored a tradition of turning simple farm fruit into something special without wasting a single ingredient. Fried apples with brown sugar captured the heart of home-style cooking, transforming an everyday apple into a rich and memorable breakfast delight. Hog maw and potatoes was a breakfast that carried both weight and flavor for households that needed energy for the day ahead. Hog maw, or hog stomach, was cleaned carefully, seasoned, and slow-cooked until tender. Potatoes were added to the pot, soaking up the rich broth and spices as they simmered together. The result was a dish that was hearty, savory, and deeply satisfying, often eaten in large portions to provide strength before long hours in the fields or factories. Though not a delicacy, it was respected because it made use of parts of the hog that otherwise might have been discarded. The combination of meat and potatoes provided both protein and comfort, ensuring that families started their mornings with something filling. Hog maw and potatoes reflected resilience, turning less desirable cuts into meals that carried pride and tradition. Though it is rarely seen on tables today, it once served as a dependable morning staple. Okra and tomato breakfast, hash turned garden vegetables into a colorful and hearty start to the day. Fresh okra was sliced into thin rounds and sautéed with ripe tomatoes, onions, and a pinch of black pepper until everything softened into a rich medley. The okra released its natural thickness, giving the dish a gentle stew-like consistency while still holding tender bites of vegetable. Served with hot cornbread or spooned over leftover rice, it offered both warmth and nourishment without requiring expensive ingredients. Grandparents remember gathering these vegetables from backyard plots at dawn, the dew still on the leaves as the skillet heated on the stove. The sweet acidity of tomatoes paired beautifully with the earthy flavor of okra, creating a combination that filled kitchens with a scent both bright and comforting. This breakfast hash celebrated the rhythm of the seasons and the importance of using what the garden gave, turning simple produce into a meal that lingered in memory long after the last bite. Hot water cornbread patties delivered the satisfying crunch of cast iron frying to countless Delta kitchens, where cornmeal was as common as morning sun. Cooks stirred hot water into fine cornmeal until the mixture held together, then shaped it by hand and slid it into shimmering oil. The patties sizzled and crisped, forming a browned crust that gave way to a tender interior. The method required no milk or eggs, only the steady skill of a practiced hand, making it accessible and quick. Families ate these cornbread rounds with eggs, greens, or a simple drizzle of honey when sugar was scarce. In many homes, the sound of batter hitting hot oil signaled breakfast was ready, filling the air with the nutty aroma of toasting corn. Hot water cornbread patties celebrated resourcefulness and flavor, reminding everyone that the best dishes often came from the simplest combinations of grain, heat, and love, passed down through generations of African American cooks. Sweet potato coffee cake was a breakfast that carried warmth, thrift, and community in every slice. Families would mash leftover sweet potatoes into the batter, seasoning it with cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes cloves before baking it in heavy cast iron pans that gave it a perfect crust. The result was moist and spiced, with a natural sweetness that came not from sugar, but from the potatoes themselves, making it both healthy and filling. It was often served at church gatherings or Sunday breakfasts when a little something special was needed on the table to bring people together. The dish reflected African American traditions of stretching what was available into something memorable, proving that nothing went to waste in kitchens where creativity was survival. Sweet potatoes were plentiful and affordable, making them an easy way to feed a family while also adding vitamins and nourishment to the meal. The cake was often paired with coffee, hot milk, or even molasses drinks, making it a centerpiece of mornings that were simple yet comforting. Though it is rarely baked today, this coffee cake once carried generations through hard times and sweet mornings alike, leaving memories of warmth, family, and resilience with every bite. Red-eye gravy with country ham was a bold wake-up call that combined salty meat drippings with the sharp bite of black coffee. After thick slices of cured ham were seared in a cast-iron skillet, a splash of hot coffee was poured into the pan to release every bit of smoky flavor. The result was a thin, savory gravy that was spooned over grits or biscuits, adding a punch of flavor that jolted sleepy mornings to life. This dish reflected a no-waste mindset, where nothing from a prized ham went unused. Grandparents remember the rich aroma of coffee mingling with sizzling pork as a smell that meant breakfast was nearly ready. Served alongside eggs or even spooned over rice, red-eye gravy gave working families the hearty start they needed for long days in the fields or factories. It was simple, strong, and unforgettable, a dish that carried the warmth of tradition and the energy of early morning labor. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy provided a bold, bracing start to the morning with a flavor that lingered long after breakfast was done. Thick slices of country-cured ham were seared in a heavy skillet until their edges browned and their fat rendered into a savory base. Into that sizzling pan went black coffee, which deglazed the salty bits and created a thin, smoky gravy. The sharp bitterness of coffee balanced the ham's rich saltiness, producing a sauce both surprising and addictive. Poured over warm biscuits or spooned onto grits, the gravy soaked in and carried a gentle caffeine kick that woke up the senses. Families across the South prized this dish for its simplicity and strength, a reminder of farm mornings when nothing went to waste. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy reflected the ingenuity of African-American cooks who transformed pantry basics into something unforgettable, a breakfast that spoke of resilience and tradition with every deep, savory bite. Okra fritters were once a common breakfast food that made use of one of the most iconic crops in African-American gardens. Fresh okra would be chopped, mixed with cornmeal and seasoning, and fried in small patties until golden brown. The result was crisp on the outside, tender on the inside, and full of earthy flavor that paired perfectly with hot coffee or milk. For families, okra fritters were both affordable and filling, using whatever the garden provided in abundance. They could be eaten plain with cane syrup or alongside eggs, making them versatile as well as practical. The dish reflected the deep agricultural roots of African-American communities, where nothing grown went to waste. It was also a way of starting the day with something satisfying before long hours of labor. While okra remains popular in Southern cooking, the fritter form has faded from breakfast tables, leaving behind only the memory of mornings built on thrift and flavor. Rice and eggs. Breakfast bowls turned yesterday's supper into a fresh and filling morning meal. Leftover rice was fried gently in butter until each grain glistened, then topped with softly scrambled eggs, seasoned with salt and a touch of black pepper. Sometimes bits of smoked sausage or garden vegetables were added for extra flavor, but the dish was satisfying even in its simplest form. Families appreciated how nothing went to waste and how this hearty bowl provided energy for a full day's work. Grandparents remember stirring the rice as it warmed, the smell of butter filling the air while eggs cooked slowly to a creamy finish. Served hot and eaten straight from the pan or in deep bowls, this breakfast was both practical and comforting. It was a favorite for busy households where mornings demanded quick, nourishing meals, and it continues to represent the ingenuity of cooks who turned leftovers into something new and delicious. Salmon croquettes with grits turned pantry staples into a breakfast feast that felt both luxurious and familiar across African-American communities of the 1970s. Canned salmon was flaked into a bowl with onions, breadcrumbs, and a little seasoning, then shaped into neat patties ready for the skillet. As they fried, the croquettes developed a crisp golden crust while staying moist inside, their aroma mingling with the gentle steam of creamy stone-ground grits bubbling nearby. This pairing brought together the coastal traditions of the South and the practicality of modern kitchens, where canned fish kept well and stretched to feed a family. Some cooks added a squeeze of lemon or a pinch of cayenne for extra brightness and heat, while others folded in fresh herbs from backyard gardens. Served with a side of sliced tomatoes or greens, salmon croquettes with grits delivered protein, comfort, and a taste of heritage, showing how everyday ingredients could be elevated into a soulful breakfast worth savoring. Buttermilk Hoecakes were thin golden cornmeal pancakes that turned an everyday staple into a morning delight. A batter of cornmeal, buttermilk, and a little melted butter was poured onto a hot cast-iron griddle where it spread into crisp-edged rounds. The cakes cooked quickly, developing a toasty aroma that filled the kitchen and tempted everyone to grab one straight from the pan. Served with honey, cane syrup, or a pat of fresh butter, they offered a satisfying balance of tangy buttermilk and sweet corn. Families loved them because they were inexpensive, fast, and endlessly versatile, equally good with fried eggs or a bowl of stewed fruit. Grandparents recall how Hoecakes were often cooked outdoors on flat hose or griddles over open fires during harvest seasons, a practical method that gave the cakes their name. Each bite carried the taste of tradition and the resourcefulness of cooks who knew how to turn simple ingredients into a breakfast worth remembering. Sweet potato biscuits brought natural sweetness and a warm orange glow to breakfast plates, showcasing a root vegetable long cherished in African American kitchens. Mashed cooked sweet potatoes were folded into a dough of flour, butter, and a touch of milk, creating a dough that baked into soft, tender biscuits. The sweet potatoes added moisture and a gentle, earthy flavor, while a hint of cinnamon or nutmeg provided subtle spice. As they baked, the biscuits released a fragrant aroma that signaled a special morning treat. Families served them warm with butter, honey, or cane syrup, turning a simple biscuit into a celebration of the harvest. Sweet potato biscuits captured the creativity of home cooks who used seasonal produce to enrich everyday meals, blending tradition with a touch of sweetness. Their bright color and comforting taste made them a favorite for children and adults alike, proving that wholesome ingredients could create a breakfast that was both nourishing and delightfully indulgent. Fish roe and onions was a breakfast plate that reflected the close ties African American communities had with rivers and local fishing. Roe sacks were cleaned and seasoned, then pan-fried in lard or butter until firm and golden. Onions were fried alongside, adding sweetness and balancing the rich flavor of the roe. The combination was eaten hot, often with bread or cornbread, creating a meal that was hearty and protein-rich. It was not a glamorous dish, but it was reliable and nutritious, making it an important breakfast in households that lived close to waterways. Roe was affordable compared to other proteins, and using it showed the resourcefulness of cooks who relied on what was readily available. Though not common today, fish roe and onions once held a respected place at the table, carrying both sustenance and tradition. Hot water cornbread cakes were the kind of breakfast that filled kitchens with warmth before the sun even cleared the trees. Cornmeal was mixed with boiling water until it formed a thick batter that could be shaped into small patties by hand. Each cake hissed as it touched the hot skillet, the edges browning to a perfect crisp while the center stayed soft and tender. Families loved these because they required only a few pantry staples, yet tasted like a feast when served with butter or a drizzle of cane syrup. Grandparents remember the sound of sizzling cakes as a gentle morning alarm, calling everyone to the table. These cakes were hearty enough to keep field workers energized through the day and simple enough for children to help prepare. Whether eaten plain or split open to cradle a slice of fried fish from the night before, hot water cornbread cakes proved that true comfort often comes from the simplest ingredients and a steady hand at the skillet. Sweet potato pancakes brought earthy sweetness and warm spice to kitchen tables, blending mashed sweet potatoes with cinnamon, nutmeg, and a splash of milk. The batter sizzled as it hit the griddle, releasing a fragrance that filled the room with comfort. Each cake browned to a gentle crisp outside while remaining moist and tender within, offering natural sweetness without the need for heavy syrup. Many families grew their own sweet potatoes, making these pancakes a natural way to use the harvest through cooler months. Some cooks stirred in chopped pecans for a nutty crunch, while others added a hint of ginger for extra warmth. Served with a dollop of butter or a drizzle of cane syrup, sweet potato pancakes became a Saturday morning favorite, reminding everyone of autumn fields and family traditions. This dish honored the African American love for root vegetables and the creativity of home cooks who turned humble ingredients into breakfast plates bursting with flavor and cultural memory. Fried catfish and cornbread was a breakfast plate that reflected the abundance of rivers and the skill of African American cooks in the South. Catfish could be caught at little cost, cleaned, coated in cornmeal, and fried crisp in cast-iron skillets. Paired with hot cornbread fresh from the oven, the meal was both hearty and nourishing. It gave workers the energy needed for long days in the fields and children the strength to get through school without hunger. Families often made it on weekends when fishing provided enough to share with neighbors, turning it into a communal meal. The taste was bold and rustic, with a combination of crunchy fish and soft bread that defined comfort. Though fish is not often associated with breakfast today, fried catfish and cornbread once stood proudly on morning tables. It remains a reflection of resilience and resourcefulness, showing how nature and tradition came together to sustain communities. Sorghum syrup waffles brought a touch of indulgence to rural breakfasts where sweet treats were rare. Yeast batter was mixed the night before, allowing it to rise slowly until morning when it was poured onto heavy cast-iron waffle irons. The waffles emerged golden and fragrant, their deep pockets waiting to catch the thick, dark sorghum syrup that poured like liquid sunshine. Families treasured this meal as a special occasion breakfast, often reserved for Sundays or harvest celebrations. Grandparents recall the excitement of waking to the smell of batter hitting hot iron and the sound of syrup bubbling on the stove. The flavor was rich and earthy, with a sweetness distinct from cane sugar, offering a taste of the fields where sorghum stalks grew tall. Served with fresh butter or sliced fruit, these waffles were a reminder that even in lean times, moments of luxury and celebration could be found at the breakfast table with patience and a well-seasoned waffle iron. Field pea and rice hash turned a simple pot of peas into a hearty breakfast that fueled long days with ease. Black-eyed peas were simmered with onions, garlic, and a little smoked meat until tender, then spooned generously over steaming white rice. The flavors melded into a comforting bowl of earthy beans and fluffy grains that filled stomachs and lifted spirits. In the 1970s, this dish connected generations, recalling the Hoppin John traditions of New Year's Day, while serving as an everyday morning staple in many African American homes. Some families stirred in hot peppers for a gentle heat, while others finished with a drizzle of pepper vinegar for brightness. Field pea and rice hash proved that a few inexpensive ingredients could yield both nourishment and rich flavor, keeping families strong and satisfied. It celebrated agricultural roots and the creativity of cooks who understood that true comfort comes from a well-seasoned pot and the love shared around the breakfast table. Souse meat with eggs was a breakfast that showed how African American cooks turned preservation into sustenance. Souse meat, made by boiling and seasoning pig parts into a gelatinous loaf, was sliced and fried in skillets until crisp at the edges. Served alongside eggs, it made for a hearty and protein-rich plate that was affordable for working families. The flavors were strong and savory, with vinegar and spice balancing the richness of the pork. Souse meat was common because it allowed families to preserve cuts that might otherwise go to waste, ensuring nothing was lost. For children, the texture could be unusual, but it was familiar to those who grew up with it as part of the household routine. Adults appreciated its practicality, especially when paired with eggs that added bulk to the meal. Though it has faded from most breakfast tables, souse meat with eggs once reflected resilience, tradition, and the unyielding ability to make much from little. Hoppin John morning skillet brought together black-eyed peas, rice, and smoky meat for a dish that powered long days of labor. Dried peas were simmered slowly with onions, garlic, and a ham hock until tender, then combined with fluffy rice in a single heavy pan. The flavors melded into a savory blend where each grain soaked up the rich broth. A sprinkle of fresh green onions brightened the skillet just before serving, adding a touch of freshness to the hearty meal. Families valued this breakfast for its affordability and the energy it provided, making it a favorite for farmers and dock workers facing dawn-to-dusk shifts. Grandparents recall stirring the pot before sunrise and letting the scent of peas and pork wake the household. Traditionally eaten for luck at New Year, it became a daily staple whenever a strong start was needed. Each spoonful carried both history and hope, a sustaining meal that remains a beloved memory of African American kitchens. Creole shrimp omelette brought the rich flavors of the Gulf Coast to morning tables, folding tender shrimp and fresh scallions into fluffy eggs seasoned with paprika and a touch of cayenne. Shrimp were quickly sautéed with butter and garlic until just pink, then combined with beaten eggs and poured into a hot skillet. As the omelet puffed, The seafood infused the eggs with a briny sweetness that spoke of Louisiana waters. Some cooks added diced bell peppers or a spoonful of tomato sauce for extra color and depth, while others finished with a squeeze of lemon. This breakfast balanced elegance and everyday comfort, reflecting African-American culinary ties to coastal Creole traditions. Families savored the dish on special weekends or when fresh shrimp were plentiful, making breakfast feel like a celebration. The Creole shrimp omelette captured the spirit of New Orleans and the surrounding Gulf, proving that a simple egg dish could deliver vibrant flavor and a taste of Southern heritage before the day began. Red gravy with rice was a breakfast dish that combined economy with comfort in African-American households. The gravy was made from tomatoes, onions, and seasoning, simmered until thick and poured over steaming rice. It was filling, affordable, and deeply satisfying, providing warmth and energy to carry through the day. For many families, rice was cheaper than bread and could be stretched to feed everyone, while tomatoes added both flavor and color. The dish was common across the South, where it became a daily staple for working people who needed hearty food before long hours of labor. Children often grew up with it as a familiar morning ritual, while adults valued its reliability and ease of preparation. Red gravy with rice was never fancy, but it symbolized resilience and the ability to make simple ingredients carry meaning. Though rarely served in breakfast form today, it was once a proud and practical tradition. Carolina Gold rice cakes gave new life to leftover grains and turned yesterday's supper into a crisp morning treat. Cold rice was mixed with a little flour, a pinch of salt, and enough fresh egg to bind it together before being shaped into small patties. Each cake hissed as it met the hot cast-iron skillet, forming a golden crust that crackled with every bite. The inside stayed soft and nutty, a reminder of the prized Carolina Gold variety once grown across the coastal South. Families enjoyed these cakes with a drizzle of cane syrup or a spoonful of stewed fruit, creating a breakfast that felt both thrifty and indulgent. Grandparents remember how the aroma of frying rice cakes filled the house, and how children would sneak one from the pan before the rest were served. These cakes were proof that nothing from yesterday's meal ever went to waste, and that a simple handful of ingredients could deliver a breakfast as memorable as any feast. Cane syrup biscuits were a breakfast treat that balanced simplicity with pure comfort. Biscuits were baked fresh, sometimes from scratch and sometimes from canned dough, then served with thick cane syrup poured generously over the top. The syrup was dark, sweet, and sticky, a regional staple that families could rely on when sugar and jams were too costly. The combination of flaky bread and syrup was both filling and indulgent, giving mornings a sense of celebration, even during lean times. For children, it was a sweet start to the day that felt like dessert, while adults valued it as quick fuel before work. Cane syrup itself was a treasured pantry item, often stored in large tins and used sparingly to stretch across weeks. Biscuits with cane syrup were not just food, but a reminder of family kitchens and the traditions that bound them together. Today, it is rarely seen, but it once carried both joy and survival in every bite. Fried fatback with hot biscuits delivered a salty crunch that anchored many Southern mornings. Thin slices of pork fatback were fried until the edges curled and crisped, releasing a smoky aroma that filled the kitchen and promised a breakfast full of flavor. The rendered drippings were often saved to season vegetables or gravy, ensuring nothing went to waste. Served alongside large, soft biscuits and strong coffee, this simple meal provided the energy needed for a day of hard work in fields or factories. Grandparents remember the crackling sound of fatback in a hot skillet and the satisfaction of pairing each crispy piece with a bite of warm bread. The combination of salty meat and fluffy biscuits was both humble and deeply satisfying, turning the simplest ingredients into a morning ritual. Fried fatback stands as a symbol of thrift and creativity, a dish that transformed an inexpensive cut into something worthy of family gatherings and long-lasting memories. Fried bologna. Breakfast sandwiches turned a simple deli meat into a beloved morning indulgence across African-American neighborhoods. Thick slices of bologna were scored around the edges to keep them from curling, then fried in a hot skillet until the surface blistered and caramelized. The sizzling meat was stacked onto soft white bread with a fried egg, crisp lettuce, or a slice of tomato, creating a sandwich that was both hearty and comforting. Some cooks added a swipe of mustard or a layer of melted cheese, while others preferred it plain to let the smoky flavor shine. Affordable and quick, it became a weekday staple for families and workers needing a satisfying meal before heading out the door. Fried bologna breakfast sandwiches captured the era's love of bold, simple flavors and the creativity of cooks who turned modest ingredients into something memorable, proving that even the humblest cuts could create a breakfast worth savoring with every crisp, savory bite. Fried grits cakes were a morning dish that turned one day's leftovers into the next day's breakfast. Grits were cooked thick, poured into pans, and chilled overnight until firm. In the morning, they were sliced into squares or rounds, then fried in a skillet with lard or butter until golden brown. The outside became crisp while the inside stayed creamy, creating a texture that was both comforting and hearty. These cakes could be eaten with syrup for sweetness, with eggs for a balanced plate, or with gravy when available. They reflected the no-waste mentality of African American kitchens, where every bit of food was stretched and reinvented. Grits themselves were a Southern staple, inexpensive and reliable, but frying them gave new life to what might otherwise be considered plain. Fried grits cakes were practical, resourceful, and flavorful, making them a breakfast that once carried households through long days of work. Sweet milk drop biscuits were the quick answer for mornings when time was short, but the craving for something warm and fresh never faded. Unlike traditional buttermilk biscuits, these were made with plain sweet milk, producing a delicate crumb and a subtle sweetness. The dough was mixed lightly by hand and dropped in rustic mounds onto a hot baking sheet, where each biscuit rose into a tender golden puff. Families prized them for their speed, needing no rolling or cutting, and for their ability to pair with anything from fried eggs to homemade jam. Grandparents recall how the smell of baking biscuits filled the kitchen in minutes, drawing sleepy children to the table. Served with cane syrup or a pat of butter, sweet milk drop biscuits turned even an ordinary morning into a small celebration. They remain a testament to the resourcefulness of cooks who could turn a few pantry staples into a breakfast that comforted the heart as much as the stomach. Collard green and onion hash gave leafy greens a starring role, turning a traditional dinner side into a savory breakfast companion. Fresh collard greens were sliced thin and quickly sautéed with sweet onions, a little garlic, and a splash of vegetable broth until tender yet vibrant. The result was a smoky, nutrient-rich hash that paired beautifully with eggs, grits, or cornbread. Some families added diced potatoes for extra heartiness, while others seasoned with a pinch of red pepper flakes to wake up the taste buds. This dish reflected a deep appreciation for garden vegetables and the ingenuity of African American cooks who brought dinner flavors to the morning table. Collard green and onion hash provided iron, vitamins, and a satisfying warmth that lasted through long days. Its quick preparation and bold taste made it a weekday favorite, while its connection to Southern tradition made it feel timeless, proving that breakfast could be as wholesome and flavorful as any evening meal. Molasses-dipped apples were a simple but cherished breakfast treat that blended sweetness with thrift. Apples would be peeled, sliced, and simmered in thick molasses until tender and glossy. The result was both rich and comforting, often eaten alongside bread or biscuits for a balanced plate. Molasses was affordable and more accessible than refined sugar, making it a staple in many African American homes. Pairing it with apples, which were plentiful during the season, stretched the sweetness into something filling and satisfying. Children especially loved this dish, as it was one of the few ways to enjoy something sweet in the morning without the expense of store-bought goods. Adults valued it as an easy way to prepare fruit in a form that lasted longer. Molasses-dipped apples carried both comfort and practicality, standing as proof that even humble ingredients could bring warmth and joy to the table. Apple and raisin fried pies were the portable breakfast treat that kept farmers and schoolchildren happy through long mornings. Diced apples and plump raisins were stewed with cinnamon and a hint of brown sugar until the filling turned syrupy and fragrant. Circles of pastry dough were filled with the mixture, folded into half moons and sealed before being fried to a golden crisp. Each bite offered a burst of warm fruit wrapped in a flaky shell that stayed delicious even hours after cooking. Families loved these hand pies for their convenience, as they could be packed into lunch pails or carried into the fields without spoiling. Grandparents recall the joy of finding one tucked into a pocket or basket, its sweet aroma a welcome surprise during a break from chores. Whether eaten warm from the skillet or cooled for later, these fried pies captured the sweetness of orchard harvests and the love of those who rose early to make them. Rice pudding. Hot cereal turned yesterday's pot of rice into a creamy, comforting breakfast that stretched ingredients and budgets with ease. Cold cooked rice was stirred into a saucepan of warm milk, sugar, and a hint of vanilla, then simmered until it thickened to a soothing porridge. A dusting of nutmeg or cinnamon brought gentle spice, while some families added raisins or chopped pecans for extra flavor. African American cooks valued this dish for its thrift and versatility, using leftover rice from dinner to create something entirely new the next morning. Served in deep bowls with a pat of butter melting on top, it filled the house with a cozy aroma that made chilly mornings feel welcoming. Children loved its gentle sweetness, and parents appreciated how quickly it came together while providing hearty nourishment. Rice pudding. Hot cereal stood as a quiet reminder that resourcefulness and flavor could walk hand in hand, proving that simple ingredients could become a treasured morning ritual. Cornbread and buttermilk bowl was one of the simplest and most enduring breakfasts in African American homes. Leftover cornbread would be crumbled into a bowl, then covered with cold buttermilk until it softened. The result was tangy, filling, and quick to prepare, making it perfect for mornings when time and money were both scarce. Families valued it because it used ingredients already on hand, stretching resources without requiring anything extra. Children often found it refreshing in the summer heat, while adults relied on its heartiness to last through long days. It was a meal that carried history, reflecting the agricultural roots of communities where corn and dairy were staples. The dish required no fancy preparation, only the wisdom of turning leftovers into something nourishing. Though rarely eaten today, cornbread and buttermilk bowls were once a daily ritual that spoke to both thrift and tradition. Stewed prunes and citrus offered a naturally sweet and nourishing side that fit perfectly with the back-to-nature movement of the 1970s. Dried prunes were simmered gently in water with slices of orange or lemon until they softened into a rich compote. A touch of cinnamon or clove added warmth, and the citrus brightened the deep, earthy flavor of the fruit. This dish required little sugar because the natural sweetness of the prunes intensified as they cooked, creating a syrupy juice that tasted indulgent yet wholesome. Served warm over oatmeal, alongside biscuits, or even chilled with yogurt, it provided fiber and essential vitamins that families valued. African American households embraced it for both its practicality and comfort, turning an inexpensive ingredient into something special. Stewed prunes and citrus stood as a testament to mindful cooking, where a simple pot of fruit could deliver nutrition and quiet pleasure, reminding everyone that breakfast could be as healthful as it was delicious without any extravagant ingredients or effort. Salt fish and Johnny cakes was a breakfast rooted deeply in heritage and tradition. Salt fish, preserved and dried to last for months, was soaked, flaked, and pan-fried until flavorful and tender. Johnny cakes, simple cornmeal cakes cooked on a griddle, were served alongside, their soft texture soaking up the salty richness of the fish. Together, the two made a breakfast that was filling, balanced, and steeped in history. The pairing reflected African and Caribbean influences that endured in African American kitchens, blending practicality with cultural memory. Salt fish provided protein when fresh fish was unavailable, while Johnny cakes required only cornmeal, water, and a little fat. The result was a plate that carried both thrift and tradition, ensuring families had strength for the day ahead. For many, it was a taste of survival and a connection to community. Saltfish and Johnny cakes once held pride on the table, even if today they are rarely remembered. Cornmeal. Hoecakes with honey butter sizzled on griddles across the South, offering a thin and crispy alternative to traditional pancakes. Finely ground cornmeal was whisked with hot water and a pinch of salt, then spooned onto a greased skillet where it cooked to a golden brown. The edges crisped while the center stayed tender, creating a satisfying contrast in every bite. A pat of soft butter blended with golden honey melted over the warm cakes, adding sweetness that complemented the rustic corn flavor. Hoecakes were beloved for their simplicity and speed, perfect for busy mornings or serving alongside eggs and greens. African-American cooks carried this tradition from farm kitchens to city apartments, showing how a few ingredients could become a breakfast favorite. Children loved them plain, while adults enjoyed the gentle sweetness of honey butter that pooled across the hot surface. Cornmeal Hoecakes with honey butter proved that the humblest grains could shine when cooked with skill, care, and a sense of history. Rice and molasses porridge was a breakfast that brought together comfort and thrift in one pot. Leftover rice was simmered slowly with water or milk until soft and creamy. Then molasses was stirred in for sweetness. The result was warm, filling, and affordable, giving families energy to start the day. Molasses was cheaper than refined sugar, and rice stretched further than bread, making this dish a natural fit for households trying to feed many mouths on little money. The flavor was rich and slightly tangy, a taste that children grew up associating with home and tradition. For adults, it was a reminder of both comfort and necessity, as it made use of ingredients that were always on hand. Rice and molasses porridge was a simple bowl, but it carried both nourishment and memory. Families ate it hot, often in large servings, to keep them going through long mornings. It was one of those breakfasts that disappeared quietly, yet left a strong mark in memory. Sorghum syrup. Waffles filled kitchens with the warm scent of toasted grain and caramel sweetness, creating a breakfast that tasted like a weekend celebration. Batter made with fresh eggs and rich milk cooked in cast-iron waffle irons until crisp and golden, ready to catch every drop of thick sorghum syrup. This dark, earthy sweetener offered a depth of flavor beyond ordinary maple, with notes of molasses and a hint of smoke from the cane fields. Families in the South prized sorghum for its nutritional value and natural richness, making it a treasured pantry staple. Some cooks whipped a little butter into the syrup for a glossy glaze, while others drizzled it straight from the jar, letting the bold taste speak for itself. Sorghum syrup waffles reflected African-American culinary heritage and the ability to elevate basic ingredients into something memorable, creating a breakfast that lingered in both flavor and memory. Every crunchy bite, followed by sticky sweetness, felt like a slow morning worth savoring. Chitlin scramble was one of those breakfasts that spoke directly to resourcefulness and resilience. Chitlins, or pig intestines, were cleaned thoroughly, boiled until tender, and then chopped into small pieces. They were folded into scrambled eggs with onions, creating a dish that was both filling and flavorful. The onions added sweetness, the eggs brought balance, and the chitlins gave a richness that turned the plate into something hearty. Though chitlins are often remembered as a holiday food today, many families once ate them regularly because they were inexpensive and ensured that no part of the hog was wasted. For farm workers and laborers, a plate of chitlin scramble gave strength before long hours of work. It was not a fancy breakfast, but it was deeply tied to survival and tradition. The aroma filled kitchens, and though strong, it carried memories of both family gatherings and everyday meals. Chitlin scramble represented more than food. It was heritage served hot on the morning table. Hot links with mustard gravy turned an ordinary morning into a bold feast of spice and tang, filling kitchens with the smoky perfume of seasoned sausage. Spicy, smoked hot links were seared until their skins blistered and juices sizzled, releasing a deep aroma that promised hearty flavor. Pan drippings were whisked with flour, broth, and sharp mustard to create a velvety gravy that carried both heat and brightness. Poured over slices of toast or spooned onto fluffy biscuits, the gravy soaked in and balanced the sausage's fire with a gentle tang. Some families added diced onions or a splash of vinegar for extra bite, while others sprinkled chopped parsley for freshness. This dish offered more than simple comfort. It was a statement of taste and tradition, celebrating the spice-loving side of Southern cooking. Hot links with mustard gravy reminded everyone at the table that breakfast could be daring and unforgettable, turning a cold morning into a lively gathering of smoky flavors and warm conversation. Turnip green juice with cornbread was one of the most iconic examples of thrift and sustenance in African American kitchens. After collard or turnip greens were simmered with seasoning and often pork, the leftover cooking liquid, known as potlikker, was saved. Instead of discarding it, families sipped it warm with crumbled cornbread. Rich in vitamins and minerals, it provided strength and comfort at the start of the day. It was not seen as waste, but as nourishment, proving how nothing was ever thrown away in kitchens that valued resourcefulness. Children grew up drinking it as part of their daily lives, while adults appreciated its health benefits and filling qualities. It was both simple and profound, turning what others discarded into something life-sustaining. Turnip green juice with cornbread was more than food. It was tradition, resilience, and heritage in a bowl. Which breakfast would start your morning right? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more forgotten meals that kept seniors fed with dignity.